Hey everybody, CVH here, and this is my first impression series where I look over the cards that have been recently revealed through the community and talk about my first impressions, basically whether or not I think they're going to be viable, some potential strategic implications, if they fit into any existing meta decks, and what I think could be interesting about them moving forward, and, bearing in mind, of course, that we know very little of the rest of the expansion. So that's just in case you're new to the channel and you haven't watched any of these videos before. I did do a pretty extensive first impression series on not only Heroes of Skyrim, but also Fall of the Dark Brotherhood. So if you guys want to go back and see a little bit more of this type of thing, those are on the channel as well. But as you guys probably know, if you've been paying attention, the Return to Clockwork City is about to be released November 30th, and I did do a news video on it in the last video, so you probably have seen that. And in this very article that we're back on right now today, they have consolidated a few spoilers from the expansion. So without further ado, let's get into talking about some of the new cards. And if you guys want to hear me talk a little bit more about the general parts of the announcement, that is in the past video, but I'm going to be really focusing on which cards they have spoiled for us so far and talking a little bit more in depth than I did in that video. But first, behold my mechanical creations. We have two Fabricants, Hulking Fabricant and Kaguti Fabricant. I have no idea if I'm saying that correctly. I'm just now realizing that I probably should have looked up the pronunciation on that thing beforehand. But basically, perhaps the most intriguing and disturbing creations were the Fabricants, unique creatures born of both flesh and metal. So basically, these are going to reward you for playing with neutral cards like the Dwemer constructs. So basically we have a 5-cost 5/5 in Endurance with Summon. If you have a neutral card in play, gain +3/+3. And the other, that I can't pronounce obviously, is a 4-cost 3/3 in Willpower. Summon if you have a neutral card in play, summon a copy of Kaguti Fabricant in the other lane. So this card, apparently they're both going to be very sort of stat-based. This sort of curve-out strategy, very simple cards that are good because of their raw stats, their attack and their health. On the left, we have a potential 5-cost 8/8 if you're able to get the buff from having a neutral card in play. Of course, we have to judge these cards based on hopefully having a neutral card in play, because that's when you're ideally going to be playing them. If you don't have a neutral card in play, the Hulking Fabricant simply turns into a Tusked Bristleback, 5-cost 5/5. Not the worst card you've probably ever played, even in Constructed. 4-cost 3/3 on the right is a bit worse. You expect a little bit more out of a 4-drop, not really passing any vanilla test there, wouldn't even be excited about it in Arena. But of course, the payoff with Kaguti Fabricant is doubling it, so you get a 4-cost 6/6 essentially, but it is split over 2 bodies, which is better against targeted removal like Piercing Javelin, Edict of Azura, worse against cards like Ice Storm. Hulking Fabricant not going to be killed by many Ice Storms ever, but a little bit more susceptible to those cards like Piercing Javelin, which can just take out one big threat. So what do I think about these cards? These are very interesting, and definitely the kind of card I think we kind of needed to push people into playing neutrals. Again, not exactly sure what many of the other cards in this expansion are. I'm sure they're going to be releasing some strong neutral cards to complement these cards, but we already have pretty reasonable neutrals anyway. And I'm not so sure about the card on the right. 4-cost 3/3 doubled could be potentially backbreaking, but I'm very intrigued by the 5-cost 8/8 potential of the Hulking Fabricant to start things off. That's just a really, really powerful body for 5 Magicka when you look at the 5-drops that are currently seeing play. Already a 5-cost 5/5, yeah, it's not really something exciting, but it does already beat cards like Thorn Histmage, and a 5-cost 8/8 immediately puts the pressure on. That's something no deck can really stand to ignore. Decks with Piercing Javelin and Edict of Azura have a little bit more leeway against this card, but even a card like Belligerent Giant, a little bit too expensive. You can cast out this card if you're an aggro deck, but if you are the pressuring person in the match and your opponent is having to play the reactive role, you just gave them a hell of a card to react to. And this does have shades of that 5-cost 8/8 that's currently running amok in Hearthstone aggro decks. I think it's Bittertide Hydra or something like that. It does have a downside. I think whenever it takes damage, you take 3 damage, something like that. But there have been cards like that in the past, like Fellreaver. Basically, what we've learned from Hearthstone is that a 5-cost 8/8 is really, really good, and aggro decks will probably try to find an excuse to play it. So basically, is the if you have a neutral card in play requirement going to allow this card to see play? And I honestly think it probably will. If all the cards that were released in today's preview came out tomorrow with none of the other cards in the expansion, I would probably experiment with Hulking Fabricant as one of the first ones. I even wound up hitting Legend. I think it was maybe 2 months ago, something like that. I was a little bit bored, and I put a neutral package in mid-range sorcerer with enraged mudcrabs, mudcrab ankle snappers, lurking crocodiles, and dwarven dynamos to buff them up, just because I thought that was a potentially powerful turn 4 play. And that deck did actually get me to legend with a pretty decent win rate. Wasn't optimal or anything, but if I think dwarven dynamo is a powerful enough tool to want to use neutrals, then a 5-cost 8/8 is definitely going to get me there as well. And I think this card will possibly see an impact on first glance. It's also interesting to think that Mundus Stone is a neutral card, and it is a support, probably one of the better objective neutral support cards. Even though I don't think Mundus Stone is great now, maybe cards with this requirement could push people to actually wanting to play Mundus Stone because it is a neutral card that could theoretically be really hard to remove for your opponent. So, turn 4, just drop a Mundus Stone out there, and then play your 5-cost 8/8 and see what keyword it gets. Moving on to the Treasure Hunters. The first of our new mechanics is Treasure Hunt. While in play, the adventurous fellows with a Treasure Hunt ability will watch each card you draw, checking to see if it's the treasure they're seeking. Once you've drawn everything they want, they'll reward you for your effort. And we see Relic Hunter as the first example of this. 2 magic, a 3/2 with Treasure Hunt item, give the item +1/+1. This is a one-time effect, as you can see here. The first weapon you draw after playing him will receive the buff. So a 2-cost 3/2, and if you're able to draw an item with this card on the board, it'll give you +1/+1 of value on that item. So translating into a 2-cost 4/3, but originally just a 2-cost 3/2. Not super sold on this card. It is a pretty generic card to show off the treasure hunt mechanic. I think this card will be absolutely fine in Arena. Any 2-cost 3/2 will be absolutely fine in Arena in my book. In certain item decks, this could be reasonable. I don't think item combo decks are really making room for this. I have gone on record saying that I think the best item decks currently are the very combo-oriented, very much in intelligence, Gardener of Swords, Master of Arms, Tome of Alteration, cycling through the entire deck, taking things a bit slower. Maybe they're trying to push for another more aggressive type of item deck in Battle Mage, perhaps with Relic Hunter, and that could actually pay off. I don't want to underrate it too much. I think objectively, it's a fine card. It's a vanilla card. The question really remains with this card, will there be enough support to really want you to play, to really make you want to play an aggressive item deck? Because right now they're a little bit lackluster. But let's move on to the other card they've previewed with Treasure Hunt. Ratway Prospector, 1-cost 1/2 with Treasure Hunt, support, item, and action. +5/+5. It also has the effect, after Ratway Prospector attacks, it gains cover. So this card will theoretically always have cover, sort of like Elder Centaur in that way, except it is a 1-drop. And this game does have a pretty serious lack of great 1-drops. This could potentially try to fill that role. It only has the stats of a Scuttler, but obviously a Scuttler that continues to get cover, that could be interesting. Someone in the chat earlier, we were talking about the cards on stream, and someone made the point this card is mostly scary, not so much for its treasure hunt. Maybe you can buff it up with items yourself, and then after it attacks, it'll keep gaining that cover, so it could potentially be very hard for your opponent to remove if you're able to attach items to it. But the treasure hunt will require you to draw at least one support, item, and action while this card is in play. It's easy to misread that again. You need to draw all 3 of the things. You can't just draw an item on turn 2 and all of a sudden it's a 6/7, and that'd be kind of insane. Obviously, if you can invest 1 Magicka and get paid off with a 6/7 of stats, you're doing pretty good, more than likely. The only problem is that it's going to be very inconsistent, and that is on purpose because that would just be absurd. So you will also have to be playing a fair amount of items in your deck or cards that generate them. I think it might mention it here. Of course, a good treasure hunter doesn't just leave matters to chance. Cards like Plunder or Crown Quartermaster, specifically this one because it's actually a good card, can guarantee that you can draw an item immediately rather than relying on the tender mercies of the shuffler, aka RNG invariance. So, of course, you could play cards like Crown Quartermaster to help yourself out there, but I do think this card is still a bit inconsistent, but the whole attacking and gaining cover thing on a 1-drop could make this card very interesting. Let's move on to Assembled Sanitizer. You might remember the video on the expansion, the news video I did earlier. This card wasn't in the article. There was an error in which they accidentally printed, in the article they put an old version of a card from early development from Direwolf or something like that, but this is the card we're actually going to be getting, Assembled Sanitizer. It is a factotum. I don't think I'm actually... I mean, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Probably somewhat close. 3 Magicka, 1/2 with Assemble, +2/+0, or lethal. So we have to talk about a little bit what Assemble is first, if we can, judge this card adequately. When you play an Assemble creature, you'll choose one of 2 bonuses. You'll give that bonus to both that creature and every other factotum in your hand and deck. So sure, a creature like Exterminator or Sanitizer, they probably need to actually Change that. May not look like much on its own, but play with another factotum, play it with enough other factotums, and you can craft some true monstrosities. So we've seen deck buffs. I mentioned this a bit in the news video with cards like Praetorian Commander and Echo of Akatosh, and they can be quite powerful. Anyone who comes from Hearthstone currently, Prince Keleseth or whatever, you probably know that as well. But this is a 3-cost 1/2 by itself, so it is going to punish you. However, you can just make it a lethal, a 3-cost 1/2 with lethal, still not really worth the magicka, but then you're going to give that to every other factotum in your hand or deck. So pretty interesting there, or you could just make it a 3-cost 3/2, again, pretty subpar for the amount of magicka you're paying, but maybe if there are enough of these and they're at least somewhat decent by themselves, you could generate a pretty scary snowball-y aggressive strategy with them. Based on the fact that this is a 3-cost and one of the assemble buffs is a buff to the attack value, I would assume this is something of more of aggressive strategy they're probably going to be trying to push with this kind of thing, possibly just stat-based, curve-out-based, and it leads me to go back to these cards. Maybe they're trying to use factotums in conjunction with the fabricants. Again, that could be pretty interesting depending on what colors work well with whatever these factotums wind up doing. So this is a really hard card to analyze by itself. We really need to see which other ones there are, because this is going to only be good in a deck with a critical mass of these factotums, so you can continue to get those buffs and snowball out of control over and over. But this one looks reasonable enough. We'll just have to see what other ones are revealed in the coming weeks. And the last card they've given us, the last new card, there is this alternate art Swims at Night down here, but the last new card they've given us in this article, Len F9, cost 6/6 with summon, draw a card of your choice from your deck. We've really saved the best for last with this one. This card looks pretty crazy. If you've ever played a card game where there was tutoring effects like this, where you can search your deck for a specific card and add it to your hand, you'll know those effects are typically, kind of hard to balance because they wind up being really, really good. This is a slow card. I'll give it that. It's a 9-cost 6/6. It's not passing the vanilla test, but the effect on this card is pretty much incredible if you're playing a control deck, searching for just that answer. How many times did your control mage opponent have Manticora exactly when they went to 10 magicka? Well, it just got a little bit higher thanks to Len F. You can search specifically for those one of cards in your 50-card deck. That's where Legends, a little bit of variance comes into play because you have those unique legendaries. Len F is one of those unique legendaries. You can only play one of them in your 50-card deck, so obviously you're not going to see this card with too much consistency, which is probably good. Having 3 of these might be a problem. You could keep searching for each other and going into this sort of endless 6/6 train against other control decks, but this does allow for more consistency with your other one-ofs like Odoving and Parthenax, Marak if you're searching for that to counter your opponent's cards. Getting those Dawn's Wraths to your hand allows for a bit of a toolboxy approach to control, and honestly, this card seems good enough to where I might even consider playing it in a mid-rangey deck with blue. I don't think I'm putting a 9-drop into a dedicated aggressive aggro deck anytime soon, especially if things get even more aggressive with the aggro decks, if they keep pushing a little bit more for the aggro, for the neutral synergy there. So if the aggressive decks continue to hone their aggression, I don't think I'm putting this in those kind of decks, but I could potentially see it in mid-range decks, and I don't want to put my foot in my mouth too much with this card, but I do think it could just be a staple in every single control deck that uses intelligence. We said this kind of thing about Nkano too from Heroes of Skyrim, and it did wind up pretty much living up to expectations. I could see Len F being very, very widely played for a long time to come, but I think this card will be a major player in Control Mage, and basically any other slow deck that winds up wanting to use intelligence in the future. Some testing is required, of course, but of all the cards revealed in this particular article, again, not many of them. I guess we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 of them. I'm most excited for the competitive viability of Len F, and if I had to pick an honorable mention, I would probably actually give it to Hulking Fabricant, although the others could definitely surprise us, and a lot of them do still require more knowledge of the expansion in general. But these are just my first impressions, my first impressions of the very first cards we've seen from Return to Clockwork City. Looks like a pretty cool expansion so far. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts too in the comments. Let me know what you think about the cards previewed so far, if I've made any good points you want to touch on. If you have some points of your own for these cards, let me know, join the conversation, and as always, if you've enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like and stay subscribed for more Legends videos, including further installments of the First Impression series as soon as we get more cards to discuss from Return to Clockwork City. Follow my stream in the description. I'll see you next time.